It's amazing, isn't it, how sometimes the quietest looking places, well, they hold these really vibrant stories.
Yeah, absolutely.
And today we're tuning into one of those. Fountain Hill, Arkansas. It might just sound like a small town on the map.
Hmm.
But honestly, there's such a fascinating history packed in there and surprisingly significant too.
Totally agree. We're about to do a real deep dive into Fountain Hill's story, its beginnings, how it changed over time. We've got some great historical materials to work with.
Okay.
Yeah, like dedicated narratives, stuff from online archives, encyclopedias. But crucially, we also have insights from K. Brad Barfield, the Ashley County historian.
Oh,
His work,
yeah.
often shared through places like the ACN's Facebook page, it really brings that local perspective, makes it come alive.
Okay, so let's paint the picture. Fountain Hill sits right up there on the northern edge of Ashley County, basically neighbors with Drew County. It's right along US 425.
Hmm.
And what's really interesting, like K. Brad Barfield points out, is that historically it served as a real hub for maybe a 10-mile circle around it.
Yeah, that's a key point.
And geographically, it's sort of the last big hill ridge before everything drops off into the Saline and Wachita river bottoms. Gives it a kind of natural importance, doesn't it?
It really does. That spot wasn't just, random feature. It seriously shaped how the whole community grew.
Right.
So our mission today, for you listening, is to track Fountain Hill's journey over its first, say, 150 years, and uncover why this seemingly small place actually mattered quite a bit in southeast Arkansas.
Okay, let's do it. So winding way back, before Fountain Hill was even a name, we're talking about this land being used for, well, thousands of years, right? As hunting grounds for indigenous peoples.
Exactly. It wasn't
Yeah.
some empty space just waiting.
No.
While the Quapaw tribe had traditional claims, their main villages were actually further north. But this whole area, sometimes called the Great Wilderness back then, it would definitely been used by other tribes too. Groups like the Caddo, the Tunica, they'd have moved through these forests, hunting, gathering resources.
That really changes how you see it, doesn't it? What maybe looked like untouched woods to the first European settlers, it had actually been lived in, used for generations.
Right.
Now, the sources we have suggest those early settlers didn't face a ton of direct resistance. Why was that?
Well, you have to think about the bigger picture, like the 1830s. The Indian Removal Act hangs heavy over everything.
Yeah, of course.
And even though Fountain Hill wasn't directly on, say, the Trail of Tears routes, the whole state of Arkansas was impacted. A lot of tribes had already been forced west by then. And interestingly, Arkansas's own sort of frontier economy was involved in supplying some of the provisions for those removals. So a really stark, complex part of the history.
It absolutely is a very sobering thing to consider. And by the 1840s, as our sources, including Barfield's research, show that Native presence in what would become Ashley County was, well, mostly gone.
Yeah, which unfortunately for them kind of clears the path for Anglo-American settlement. But it's so important to remember, just because there wasn't constant conflict doesn't erase what came before. That legacy is still there. You find archaeological sites near water. People knew about the old tribal trails that crossed the land.
Right.
So Fountain Hill's story really starts on ground that already had this deep, complex history before the settlers arrived. We can't forget that.
Definitely not. Okay, so moving into the early to mid 1800s, say 1820s, 30s, after the Quapaw ceded the land, we start seeing that first big wave of Anglo-American settlers coming in. These are folks looking for new chances on the frontier, often coming from places like Georgia, the Carolinas. What pulled them to this specific spot?
Well, one of the very first people to really make a mark was a guy named James Norris. He shows up in the 1830s,
Okay.
and he sets up his homestead right on this hill that, crucially, had two natural springs. And these springs weren't just, handy for water. They were so central, they actually gave the place its name, Fountain Hill.
Wow, that's direct. The land literally named the town.
Pretty much. And Norris, he didn't just farm. He had the foresight to build the area's first cotton gin and a grist mill.
Ah, smart.
Instantly, that turned Fountain Hill into an early processing spot for everyone around, a vital resource right from the get-go.
Makes sense. That kind of infrastructure would act like a magnet, wouldn't it?
Exactly. It created this pull. As word got out about Norris's setup and those reliable springs, more families started showing up.
Like who?
Well, the Denson family. Isaac Denson is a name that comes up a lot. They arrived in the 1840s, and soon after, Elisha Kirkpatrick opened a general store.
Okay, so the pieces are coming together.
Yeah, you're seeing the basics of a little community forming. farms, a store, mills.
So by the mid-1840s, it sounds like Fountain Hill was already getting known as a key local spot, especially for that northern part of what would become Ashley County. All thanks to those springs, really.
Definitely. Must have been a welcome sight for people moving in. Then the 1850s, you see this big boom in cotton farming across the region. And Fountain Hill's gins, later run by folks like C.G. Mears and the Phillips brothers, they got such a good reputation that planters were actually coming up from northern Louisiana to get their cotton gin there.
Yeah.
That tells you something about its early economic clout.
That's pretty impressive for a frontier spot. But it wasn't just cotton, was it? Our sources, including some of K. Brad Barfield's shared history, talk about more diverse farming back then, before the Civil War.
Absolutely. Yeah, cotton was definitely becoming king, the big cash crop. But families were still growing lots of other stuff they needed to live. Corn, sweet potatoes, rice, even some tobacco. And they were doing things like keeping bees for beeswax. It was, a more mixed bag, maybe a bit more resilient alongside the cotton focus.
And what about the trees? Huge forests around there. By 1860, Ashley County already had quite a few sawmills going. How did Fountain Hill fit into that?
Well, again, its location on that higher ground mattered. It became this natural kind of trading post, connecting the lower lands, the delta areas, with the pine forests further west. And you hear this in local accounts a lot. It was just seen as a good place to settle because getting food and resources was relatively easy. It had that natural advantage.
Okay, now this is fascinating how its sort of administrative address kept changing as the counties formed around it. Initially, back in the 1840s, it was actually part of Bradley County. Seems kind of far now.
That's right. And in 1846, they actually set up a post office in Fountain Hill, and the address said Bradley County. But same year, 1846, Drew County gets created. New boundaries are drawn, and boom, Fountain Hill finds itself in Drew County. That didn't last too long, though.
And there's this really interesting local story, right, about some of the very first Drew County court meetings happening near Fountain Hill at Alexander Rawls's place.
Yeah, that's a great little piece of local lore. And what makes it even more interesting is that Rawls's home was actually located in what would later become northern Ashley County.
Wait, really?
Yeah. So for a short time, October 1846, this area near Fountain Hill, before Ashley County even existed, served as a really early spot for Drew County justice. It just shows how much things were shifting back then.
Man, like county line musical chairs. Okay, so then 1848, Ashley County is officially formed, carved out from Drew, Chicot, Union counties. And Fountain Hill, being already somewhat established, naturally becomes part of this new county, Ashley.
And because it was already established, it had a certain standing in the brand new county. Hamburg, which became the permanent county seat, hadn't really been laid out yet. So Fountain Hill had a bit of a head start, community-wise.
Okay, so get this, and this is a really cool detail from local history, spring of 1849, the very first government sessions for Ashley County. They happened in Fountain Hill.
That's right.
At Isaac Denson's house. His place was the temporary courthouse. Can you imagine the county government starting up in someone's living room?
Yeah. And Denson actually got paid, I think it was $5 a session for hosting. It really highlights how informal but, vital those beginnings were.
Wow.
There's an old record from 1891 that specifically mentions an Ashley County court term held at Denson's house in late March 49. So it really cements Fountain Hill's role right at the start.
So right there in Fountain Hill, the first county officials are doing the basic work, levying taxes, handling the first legal cases. It was literally Ashley County's first capital, even if just for a bit.
Exactly. It played this fundamental role in getting the whole county's civic structure off the ground. Now, of course, later on, they decided to put the permanent county seat and build a proper courthouse in Hamburg.
Right, more central.
Yeah, made sense to serve the whole growing county better from there.
But you can totally see why people in Fountain Hill would have this lasting pride in that initial role. I mean, folks like Denson and Norris literally opened their homes to get the county started.
Yeah.
That's a pretty amazing piece of local heritage.
For sure. Okay, shifting gears a bit to the economy. After the mid-1800s, cotton really becomes the main cash crop, though you still have smaller farms doing their own thing for subsistence. And Fountain Hill, with its gins and location, it stays a key local market spot.
And after the Civil War, with formerly enslaved people often moving into sharecropping, cotton production kept going, right? Keeping those gins busy.
Definitely. But then, late 1800s, things changed dramatically again with the huge expansion of the timber industry.
Ah, the timber boom.
Yeah, that reshaped everything in southeast Arkansas, massive logging operations, railroads coming in, big companies like Crossett Lumber moving in, huge impact.
And Fountain Hill, even if it wasn't a big mill town itself, it still caught some of that economic wave. Right?
Oh, for sure. Locals got jobs cutting and hauling timber, and there were smaller independent sawmills scattered around the area too. It brought a new kind of activity.
Yeah.
And get this, by 1912, there was even a proposal for an electric railroad connecting Crossett, Fountain Hill, and Monticello.
Seriously, an electric one.
Yeah. Now, it never actually got built, but the fact they even proposed it shows that Fountain Hill was still seen as, an important link in the region's transport network then.
Interesting. And eventually, the Ashley, Drew, and Northern Railroad did come through the area, right? Which
Yeah.
must have helped get timber and farm goods out to bigger markets.
Absolutely. Improved access significantly. Then, 1928, another big step. Arkansas Highway 13, which we now know as US 425, gets built right through town.
Okay, that would definitely cement its role as a local trade center.
Yeah, the early 20th century seems like a pretty busy time for the village. Several general stores operating, the gin's still going, even a blacksmith shop.
Mm-hmm.
George Washington Mears General Store is one people really remember as a community cornerstone back then.
And you had other stores too, right? Like the Kirkpatricks and Gillespie's. Those names keep popping up.
Yeah, those early families stayed influential. And for a while, Fountain Hill even had its own bank.
Hmm.
That's usually a sign of a pretty decent local economy.
Until the Great Depression hit, I suppose.
Right, that brought tough times like everywhere. But the WPA projects helped. They built the agriculture building and the home economics cottage at the school, which provided some relief and work.
Mm-hmm. And timber and farming, they stayed important for jobs.
Yeah, they remained the mainstays for a lot of folks. But then, as you get into the mid-20th century, industry starts consolidating, bigger mills grow elsewhere, like in Crossett,
Right, the familiar story.
and the economic pace in Fountain Hill starts to slow down. It's that common pattern in rural towns.
Still, it hung on as a local market town for a while.
Oh, yeah. Right into the 60s, 70s, even 80s, farmers from around the area, even other counties, would still come to Fountain Hill for the co-op or the feed stores.
I bet. That old Fountain Hill grocery with the Coca-Cola sign painted on it, that image really sticks.
Yeah, it's a classic snapshot of that time. Nowadays, the economy is definitely quieter. A lot of residents commute to bigger towns for work.
Mm-hmm.
Though small-scale farming and forestry, they're still part of the picture. The town supports those traditions, and you still got a couple of convenience stores, the bank branch.
It really is a story of adapting, isn't it? Like K-Bread, Barfield, and others point out, from that pioneer spot through the timber days to its current, quieter, rural feel.
Exactly. It's constantly adjusted. And they still try things, like the Frontier Days Festival, to keep that community spirit going and maybe attract some activity. Shows that resilience.
Okay, let's talk about the people, the population itself. Early on, the census didn't list Fountain Hill separately, you said.
Right.
But it grew enough after the Civil War and into the early 1900s that they actually incorporated as a town in 1921. That's a big step.
It is. And by the 1930 census, it had 215 people. The population seems to have peaked around 1980, maybe about 350 residents.
So the mid to late 20th century was probably its biggest period, population-wise.
Yeah.
Bigger families, more local jobs then.
Likely, yeah. But then, like in so many rural places, after 1980, you see that slow decline start. By 2000, it was down to about 160 people.
There was a little bump up in 2010, but then the 2020 census showed just 108 residents.
Yeah, so it really has become numerically a very small town. Now, demographically, it's always been a biracial community. Early on, mostly white settlers documented. But after the Civil War, you see more black residents, often working as sharecroppers. By 2010, about a third of the town identified as African American.
And like most of the South back then, churches, schools, they were segregated for a long time.
Yes, until integration came in the late 1960s. Local accounts suggest things are, more inclusive in civic life today.
And you also see the effects of an aging population. And the school closing in 2004, that must have been tough. Probably meant fewer young families stuck around.
Yeah, that school closure was a huge deal and likely a factor. But what's strong is this sense of community among the folks still there. And you have all these former residents, the town and school alumni, who still feel really connected.
Right, they come back for reunions and stuff.
Exactly. It shows that deep tie to their roots, even if they live elsewhere now.
It really paints this picture of a place where people know each other, connections run deep, and there's this shared pride in their history and, well, their ability to stick together through changes.
Absolutely. And right at the center of that spirit, you always find the key institutions, the churches and the school.
Yeah.
Churches probably started popping up mid-1800s. We know there was a Methodist congregation by the 1870s. They were more than just places of worship. They were social centers.
But the First Baptist Church seems like a real anchor, right? Going way back to the 19th century, been there through thick and thin.
Definitely a long-standing pillar.
Yeah.
And what's really telling is how the churches stepped up after that bad school fire in 1917.
Oh, yeah. What happened?
The school burned down, and the churches actually opened their doors and held classes inside.
Wow. Really?
Yeah, it just shows how committed they were to the whole town's well-being, not just their own members. Real civic duty.
That's fantastic. And the Baptist Church there even helped organize bigger regional church groups. So its influence went beyond just Fountain Hill.
That's right. Shows a certain level of leadership extending outwards. And even today, there are still 2 active churches playing a big role in community life and events.
Mm-hmm. And it's kind of poignant, that detail about some of the church buildings using bricks salvaged from the old schoolhouse.
Isn't it? It creates this physical link between faith, education, and that enduring community spirit. Really symbolic.
And speaking of the school education was clearly important from early on. That private Fountain Hill Academy started way back in 1851.
Yeah, shows an early commitment. Then a public school system got organized later. And by the early 20th century, that school was just central to the town's identity.
It grew over time, became a K-12 school, drawing kids from all around.
Right. Consolidated smaller districts in the 30s. Generations went through there. Graduated from Fountain Hill High. That was a big deal, a source of pride. They figure maybe 1,200, 1,300 kids graduated over the years.
And a lot of them went on to college, found success elsewhere, adding to that local pride.
Exactly. And the school colors, orange and black, the Wildcats mascot, those things really unite people, even now.
Which must have made closing the school in 2004 just incredibly difficult. The end of an era.
Oh, hugely emotional, undoubtedly. A massive change for the town. But the memories are strong. You still have alumni reunions. Sometimes they use the old school grounds for gatherings.
That quote we saw about the echo of the school still being there, that really captures it.
It does. And besides church and school, you had other things going on, like that annual Frontier Days festival celebrating the pioneer roots, bringing people together.
Right. And church homecomings, revival meetings, those were big social events too, I bet.
Definitely key parts of the social calendar. And something else that stands out is the town's really strong tradition of military service. From the Civil War right through to recent conflicts, people from Fountain Hill have served, and the community really honors its veterans.
That story about the wartime letters during World War II, how important they were, that really brings it home, how connected everyone felt.
It does. It personalizes that sacrifice.
Yeah.
And you see those prominent family names again and again. Norris, Denson, Kirkpatrick, Mears, White.
You're right, the early ones?
Yeah, and how they intermarried, weaving this tight social fabric early on. And then later you see other families stepping up as leaders. The Gardners, Simmons, McCains. Shows that continuity.
And the local papers, the Ashley County Eagle, the leader, they were like the town's diary, weren't they? Recording everything.
Absolutely crucial for chronicling daily life, school news, community events. The ongoing record.
Now, we also have to touch on the harder parts of history. That awful 1932 lynching of Frank Tucker in nearby Crosset, that must have affected Fountain Hill too.
Undoubtedly. It would have cast a long shadow over the whole area, highlighting the terrible racial injustices and tensions of that time. It's important not to ignore those parts.
No, absolutely not. But then on a completely different note, there's this unique kind of surprising connection. Fountain Hill is the birthplace of Joseph Jackson.
Yeah, father of the Jackson Five, Michael Jackson, the whole family.
That's incredible. This small rural town in Arkansas producing the patriarch of one of the world's biggest musical dynasties.
It's pretty remarkable, isn't it? Adds this completely unexpected layer to Fountain Hill's story and significance.
Wild. And just a few years ago, 2021, they celebrated the centennial of the town's incorporation. That's a real marker of endurance.
Definitely. It shows how much the community values its past. They work hard to preserve it through archives, collecting oral histories, keeping those connections alive.
It brings us back to that quote from K. Brad Barfield, the historian.
Yeah, that Fountain Hill is more than just a town. It is a living history of Southeast Arkansas. A story of growth, adaptation, and community.
That sums it up well.
It really does. It's like a repository for all that local heritage, the springs, the people, the events. And our sources for this dives the Encyclopedia of Arkansas, Frank Denson's scrapbook, Y.W. Etheridge's writings, research shared by local historians online and elsewhere, census data, and all those family stories passed down, they all paint this incredibly rich picture.
So yeah, when you pull it all together, Fountain Hill's story is, well, it's surprisingly significant, isn't it? It wasn't just some random spot.
Not at all.
It was an early hub, played a key role in getting Ashley County started, and it's shown this amazing resilience through all sorts of economic ups and downs, population shifts.
hmm And always at the heart of it, that strong sense of community tied to the churches, the school, that shared history.
Taking this kind of deep dive, it really makes you think, doesn't it? How many other places that look quiet on the surface have these incredible, important stories just waiting?
Exactly. It kind of nudges you to wonder about the history right under your own feet, in your own town or neighborhood. What layers are hidden there?
Yeah, good point. Well, thank you for joining us on this exploration into a really fascinating past of Fountain Hill, Arkansas.